Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event, Unlocking Election Victory, New Polls on the Power of California's Battleground Latinas. My name is Karina Martinez, and I'm a communications specialist with a background in civic engagement, and I've worked at the local, state, and national levels. I'm honored to be moderating today's discussion on Latino voter preferences, elections, and the data driving the Get Out the Vote efforts. In this session, you'll hear key findings from two recent polls presented by Data for Social Good, with additional insights from Communities for a New California. Please note that this is a listening session only, but we'll reserve a time for questions at the end. You can submit your questions using Zoom's Q&A function. Following this press conference, we'll provide a media package with all of the relevant information discussed today, including additional materials highlighting key voter outreach programs, as well as powerful stories from our constituents. Now, for our agenda today, we're going to be seeing a presentation overview and context giving us the lay of the land. Then we'll move into California Latino Poll, focused on presidential candidates. After that, we will see the California Latinas Survey. And finally, key takeaways and questions. So thank you again for joining us. Now, let's begin by welcoming Pablo Rodriguez with Communities for a New California.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pablo Rodriguez. I am the founding executive director of Communities for a New California. If you'll give us just a moment, we will be sharing the screen where you'll be able to see our slide deck that we're going to be reviewing today. As I was saying, my name is Pablo Rodriguez. I'm the founding executive director of Communities for New California. Communities for New California Action Fund, our 501c4 social welfare organization, works to improve economic opportunities and health for people living in the rural areas of California. We bring together residents, especially those from low-income and working-class families, to organize and advocate for public policy that benefits all our neighborhoods. For the purposes of today's presentation, I also want to highlight that Communities for New California Action Fund is working in 4 congressional districts to engage voters and earn their vote based on the issues that it is that we'll be talking about today. If I can have the next slide, please. Setting the context for today's presentation, it's important to highlight that the census that was successful and the redistricting that it triggered created the following in California. There are significant changes that have happened as a result of the redistricting. At the congressional level, 16 of the 52 congressional districts are now Latino majority districts. In the California State Senate, 10 of the 40 state Senate districts are Latino majority districts. At the state assembly level, 22 of the 80 state assembly districts are Latino majority districts. Slide, please. When you hear Latino majority, we are encouraging you to think Latina women voting power. There are 3.2 million registered Latina voters in California. That is 1 in 6 of every registered voter in California, which is a Latina woman. 1 of every 5 San Joaquin Valley voters is a Latina woman. That's over 505,000 from Sacramento County down to Kern County. 1 of every 4 registered voters in the North Valley, again, Sacramento down to Madera County, is a Latina woman voter. That's over 90,000 voters. In the South Valley, Fresno County down to Kern County, nearly 1/3 is a Latina woman. That's 95,000 voters. These numbers are significant, as we remember that many of the races in the San Joaquin Valley are often decided by less than 5,000 votes. Slide, please. There's been steady growth of the Latina voting population in the California Battleground congressional districts. The chart that you see on your screen shows the citizen voting age population growth over the last 10 years. So what you see is the Latina citizen voting age population grew by 52% from 2012 to 2022. That's a growth of over 217,000 voters. More Latinas are becoming eligible to vote every day. Slide, please. Latino registration differences in these districts that we're highlighting today favor women. So Latinas outpace men in registration. Latinas register to vote at higher rates than Latinos in every district. A total of almost 400,000 Latinas are registered to vote in just these 5 congressional districts. That's over a 58,000 voter difference. And again, what you see on your screen are the congressional districts that go from Stockton all the way down through Kern County, up the high desert and then Antelope Valley with Congressional District 27, and then south into Riverside County and Congressional District 41. Slide, please. Latina women outvote Latino men in every battleground district that it is that we're highlighting. Again, the districts that it is that I just highlighted. The 2020 general election shows that women have dominated at the ballot box. Latinas outvote Latinos in every district highlighted. And not only do Latinas register at higher rates, but they also vote at higher rates. Slide, please. There is, however, opportunity for growth. When Latina women are compared to women of other ethnicities and races, as you see on the chart in green, there's an opportunity for growth, a significant one for Latina women. So the turnout rates for women in different ethnic groups shows the need for focused outreach and engagement within Latina registered voters. It shows room for growth for further potential separating them from their male counterparts. Slide, please. Of course, the question is, if we're going to engage and earn the votes of Latina women, what is the step or what is the process to that? Trusted messengers that we found when we surveyed the Latina voters or the Latina women, 70% of Latinas seek political advice through a community lens. So Latino community orientation shows that 36% of Latinas say that they would trust a community organization over any other option when getting advice of who to vote for. Close behind, 34%, they would listen to a community leader. 18.6% would listen to an elected official. There's a really important bar on this graph that shows other, that is influencers and celebrities. We believe that that is also significant, again, given, and we'll cover this in the future slides or the slides that are coming up, again, highlighting the razor thin margin for how elections have been decided in these districts that we're highlighting, that have often been decided by 5,000 votes or less. Slide, please. We will go into further detail about how Latinas' primary concerns statewide are jobs, healthcare, and housing costs. We'll break down information on the regional level as well. But the top 3 at the statewide levels continue to show a community focus. 31.4% of Latinas identify jobs in the economy as the #1 issue they consider when choosing a candidate. Healthcare is the second most popular issue, with 16% choosing healthcare. Rounding out the top 3, housing costs at 14.9% of Latinas picking this as their top issue. Slide, please. There's a really significant group of voters, which are independent, or you'll hear me call them no party preference voters. This chart is very important to me because it highlights the reason why communities from New California chooses to say battleground districts and not swing districts. As you can see in the chart, every one of these congressional districts, which are currently considered battleground districts in California, show a significant number of no party preference voters that are shown in green that, again, make up a significant portion of the electorate. And again, we remember that 38,024 votes decided the winner of the top 5 most competitive of these battleground districts to the right. Independent voter party affiliation needs to be understood, is often a political expression that shows them dissatisfaction with both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Slide, please. This slide shows voter turnout in the 2022 midterm elections. And it shows dramatically low voter turnout amongst the independent or no party preference voters. Again, of the 5 most competitive districts, 38,000 decided these top 5 most competitive districts. That is significant, and we'll show a slide towards the end of the presentation today that shows that currently, or as of the last midterm election, 4 seats determine who controls Congress in the United States House of Representatives. There's a 4-seat difference, of which party will control Congress to get to the majority of 218 seats in the House of Representatives. There's another thing that I'd like to be able to call your attention to in this slide. If we remember, based on redistricting, each congressional district nationally is cut and shaped by population. That is the reason why you see the Southern California districts going from, Congressional District 27 down to 47 as having more registered voters. District 13 and 22, if you ask yourself why they're smaller, it's because we are young districts, meaning there are many people who are not old enough to vote yet. And it's shown in the registered voters numbers. And we'll talk about it more about the growing pace of the Latino vote as more and more Latinos continue to become eligible to vote as they turn 18. But each one of these districts, again, was cut and shaped by a population of 761,000 voters. I'm sorry, 761,000 residents, forgive me. Slide, please. And I'll throw to Jesse from Data for Social Good that will be presenting the findings of our polling and statewide surveys.
Okay, so thank you, Pablo. Hello, everybody. My name is Jessie Rodriguez. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Operations with Data for Social Good. So just to give you a little bit of background on who we are, Data for Social Good, or DSG, is a research and consulting organization, and we are dedicated to providing data, tools, and strategies that advance social justice causes and help community organizations like CNC with their own capacity building. So our approach is to bring the diverse electorate's voices to bear within the electoral process and also outside of that process. So part of that work was our collaboration with CNC in conducting some statewide polls in which I'm going to be presenting some of our key findings for today. And so the first poll that we're going to be going over is our California statewide Latino poll. This poll reached almost 1,200 respondents, so 1,200 registered voters in California, and this included both male and female Latinos. Before we get into some of the results, a few definitions I want to establish here is that for some of these results, you'll see explanations and breakdowns by region, and I want to be able to define these regions to you. So when we say Central Valley, that means we're looking at respondents from these following counties. This includes Sacramento, San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced, Madera, Fresno, Kings, Tulare, and Kern. And then when we refer to the Southern California counties, this includes LA and Riverside counties. Okay, so for the first section, we're going to look at respondents in relation to presidential questions. The very first question that we asked folks is, in general, how would they describe their political lean? So we saw that from our respondent pool, about 42% identified as moderate leaning. This was followed by liberal leaning respondents at 37.2% and our conservative leaning respondents at 21.3%. Breaking this down further, we can see that political lean varies a little bit by region. So for our liberal respondents, we had about 43% of them come from Southern California. And then for our moderate respondents, we see that a good majority of them are from the Central Valley at 48.6%. Okay, looking at political lean by age group, a few things to note here. In its distribution, we see that the 18 to 34-year-old age group is the most likely of all age groups to lean liberal, and the 35 to 45-year-old age group is the most likely of all age groups to lean moderate. So this is just to give you a better picture of our respondent pool and their political lean, and then we'll go into some of the other questions. Okay, before we get into those questions, some key takeaways I want to highlight here and that you'll be able to see in the following slides is that we noticed a boost in Democratic nominee support ever since Kamala Harris entered the race. And this was in comparison to our initial female-only poll that we held before President Biden dropped out of the Democratic race. So Latina Latina Democrat respondents were about 14% more likely to vote for the Democratic nominee since Biden dropped. And this increase was significantly more for our NPP respondents. So we saw an increase by about 26 percentage points from Latina NPP. Regarding Republican gain, we noted that there was minimal gain between our Latino Republican respondents by just about 1%, and only about 2.8% of our Latina NPP said that they would go to Trump. Okay. Sorry. And then for this next question, so we asked, who do you plan on voting for this fall in the presidential election? Overall, our sample pool said about 56% of our respondents would vote for Harris, and then this was followed by about 27% saying that they would vote for Trump. And we did have a pool of about 17.5% of respondents saying that they would vote for another candidate, or that they plan to vote but not for president, or that they do not plan to vote at all. So a key thing to note here is that this poll was conducted before RFK Jr. dropped from the race. So that last column there might look a little bit different if you were to ask the question today. Okay. Now comparing our results within this survey and the one that I mentioned we conducted before. This is in order to give you a visual of where those drops and increases came from. So looking at Democrat Latinas voting for Democrat, we saw an increase by about 14 percentage points. And then looking at NPP Latinas voting for Democrat, we saw an increase for about 26 percentage points, 27. Looking at Republicans voting Republicans, there was only a gain by about 1%, and then NPP for the Republican nominee only increased by 2.8%. Now taking a closer look at just NPP voters here, again, the largest increase that we saw was NPP going for Harris or going for the Democratic nominee, with marginal increases for NPP voting for Trump. And then where we saw those decreases came from NPP saying that they would vote for another candidate and NPP saying that they were not going to vote, both decreasing by about 5.5 and 4.2% respectively. Okay, now taking a closer look at this question by region, regardless of region, respondents were more likely to vote for Harris, and this was just on trend with our California statewide results. Splitting it now by party and gender, looking at just Democratic Latinas versus NPP Latinas, we see that there's a stronger sense of support for the Democratic nominee by Democrat Latinas. So we see about 82% of our Democratic Latinas committed to voting for Harris, whereas 46.1% of NPP Latinas would say so. Okay, so taking into consideration who they're voting for, we followed up with a question that was aimed at looking at what their key motivators are. So here are some takeaways from that. Preservation for democracy came out as a top motivator for our respondents as to who they were going to vote for. About 45% of our respondents were motivated to vote for a candidate that they believe would be good for democracy. And this was especially true for Harris supporters. So we have a bit of a breakdown there based on some key features we want to look at. And then another interesting point that we noted as a key motivator were picking the lesser of two evils. So about 24% of our respondents were motivated to vote for their candidate based on believing that they were the lesser of two evils. Something that I do want to note here is that although Trump supporters were not prominent in selecting the lesser of two evils choice as to why they wanted to vote for him, something that a lot of their numbers went towards is voting for Trump because of his platform and policies as their top motivator. Okay, so again, a closer look at what this distribution looks like. 46% of our total respondents said that they believe their candidate is good for democracy, and about 24% said that their candidate is the lesser of two evils, and this is regardless of looking at who they vote for, so this is a total pool. Now, by splitting it based on who they committed to vote for, and then by party and gender, we see that Harris supporters were more likely than Trump supporters to say that they believe their candidate is good for democracy, and this was especially true for Democratic Latina Harris supporters. Okay, breaking this down by age, we see that this idea of supporting a candidate because of that candidate being good for democracy was popular with a plurality for age groups 46 plus for Harris voters. So we see that in relation to just the Harris voters, 18 to 34 and 35 to 45 did not quite reach that plurality, but they did still have a significant amount of respondents saying that they believe she's good for democracy. Okay. And then looking at the lesser of two evils option here, this was more of a popular choice with our NPP Latinas rather than our Democratic Latinas, and especially for our Harris voters. Again, by age breakdown, we see a switch up here. So now we see that the I think they are lesser than two evils option was primarily selected by the younger age cohorts. So 18 to 34 and 35 to 45 had larger numbers than their older age cohorts. So just to summarize some of the things that we went over right now, California Latino respondents in general seem to be supporting Harris, particularly because they believe that she is good for democracy and because they view her as a lesser of two evils, and we note those differences in what groups are saying what. When it comes to Trump supporters, the primary reason that they're motivated to vote for him is because they like his platform, followed by a belief that he is good for democracy. Okay, so we then followed up that question with an opposing question, knowing that who they're going to vote for, what are their concerns about the opposing candidate. So some of the top takeaways from this are a disagreement on policies. About 30% of our respondents were concerned about the other candidates' policies. So this was true for both Harris and Trump supporters, but especially for Trump supporters, as you can see some of those key statistics there. And then a secondary point that we want to point out is this concern over corruption. So about 20% of our respondents showed a concern for corruption with the opposing candidate, and this was especially true for Harris supporters. Another thing to note about the Trump supporters here is that although this was not a prominent reason for a majority of them, respondents were likely to say that they supported Trump because they were concerned about Harris's policies. So more of the numbers went to that first disagreement on policies aspect. Okay, so again, here's that breakdown. 30% don't agree with the other candidate's policies, and 20% say that the other candidate is corrupt. And then looking at this in an age breakdown point of view, for those who said that they don't agree with the other candidate's policies, we see a majority of these numbers coming from respondents who believe or who say that they are going to vote for Trump, with across all age groups at about 50% or more. And then looking at Harris voters, the largest percentage of folks that don't agree with the other candidates' policies came from 18 to 34-year-olds. Okay, now looking at this by region, it seems that corruption was especially top of mind for our Central Valley Harris voters. So they have about a 20% delta between Harris voters from other regions, and then this issue was not necessarily a case for our Trump supporters. And then lastly, looking at the other candidate is corrupt, but through an age breakdown, this was especially the concern for our older age groups, especially in relation to Harris voters. So about 33% of our 65 plus Harris voters said that this is the reason or the top concern for the candidate that they are not supporting. Okay, so just to summarize this section then, we want to note that Harris supporters are concerned about Trump because their top reasons being he is dangerous to democracy. As you can see, that's important for Democrat, moderate, liberal-leaning, and female respondents. And then those concerned about Trump potentially being corrupt is came from Central Valley respondents, are respondents age 65 plus and are Democratic Latinas. For Trump supporters who are concerned about Harris, the top reason was because they don't agree with her policies. This was especially true for our SoCal and other region respondents, and our 18 to 64, basically almost all of our age groups supporting Trump. And then secondarily, they believe that she is dangerous to democracy. So as Pablo mentioned, the no party preference voter tends to be an enigma in politics and has recently become more of a focus between both Democratic and Republican parties. So we want to give a bit of a deep dive on NPPs in California, and in particularly Latino NPPs. So first we begin with this sort of analysis of the last 2 decades. The percentage of registered Latino Democrats and Latino Republicans has decreased, while we note that there has been about an 8 percentage point increase in Latino NPP party registration. So this is just statewide numbers for Latinos. Okay, comparing against just the general California registered NPP, we have this left chart showing the increases in registration for no party preference voters in all of California. And then on the right-hand side, we show the share of registered Latino NPP. So if you could move the cursor just a bit to the right, please. Yes, thank you. Since 2004, we see that there has been about a 22% increase in Latino NPP for the state of California, making up the share of NPP registered voters. So you might be asking, what does that share look like? Over the last 20 something years, we have seen an evening between Latino men and Latina women registering as NPP. So previously, we had a slightly higher number or percentage point of Latina women registering as NPP. And as we get closer to this year, this is the first year where that number has evened out. So both are representing the NPP part registration or share of registered voters in California at about 49%. But looking at the raw numbers, it's still important to note that there are more registered Latina NPP voters than there are Latino men. Okay, so now looking at NPP Latinos split by age, this is a really interesting visual that I find personally engaging, just because you can see that stark and very sharp increase from that 18 to 34 category. So as we are bringing in more folks to our electorate as they're coming of age to register to vote, something that is important to pay attention to here is that 18 to 34-year-old category registering as no party preference. And something that we're trying to urge everybody to pay attention to is what motivators or what are the reasons that this may be, and how you can then engage no party preference voters into politics and into being represented through the electoral process. Okay, so now we want to look at some key battleground districts here. This includes Congressional Districts 13, 22, and 41. On the left-hand side, we show the NPP registration between the 2022 midterm elections and then now in this presidential election year. There has been steady rates of NPP throughout the region, so close to 20 to 23% based on which district you're looking at. And then looking at the share of NPP that are Latino in these districts, for districts 13 and 22, we have over 50% by a comfortable margin register as NPP. And then in CA 41, they make up over a third of our NPP voters. So again, just to reiterate, this is an electorate that you want to pay attention to, especially considering that these are battleground districts. Okay, and then just to reiterate again, Latinas are making up the majority of our NPP registered voters, especially in these battleground districts. So on the left, we have our charts comparing 2022 and 2024 NPP registration for Latino men. And on the right, we have the same figures, but for Latina women. So we see that here, above all, or across all of the columns and across all of the districts, Latinas have a plurality over 50% of the NPP share for Latino registrations. Okay, so why is this important? Some of the key takeaways that we're trying to emphasize here about NPP growth is that there is a mistaken assumption about Latinos. There's an idea, and it's not just unique to California, but there's an idea that the Latino vote will go to Democrats. And unfortunately, this enables an argument about whether or not how to engage them through persuasion versus organizing. So something that I would encourage is to note that this growth in NPP can really speak to how neither party has really invested in engaging with Latino voters and their issues and the things that are important to them. especially with the large percentage of NPP youth growing with every election cycle, it becomes problematic for parties to organize because they do sit outside of their standard model. So this calls to attention a need for adjusting the current approach for Latinos and for NPP or independent voters. The issue is not necessarily with the customer, but what the product or the parties are offering to those voters, right? Parties need to listen to Latinos and earn their votes rather than just trying to educate them. By trying to just educate them, you're undermining their own agency and their own ability to engage with politics by not acknowledging that they are already showing some sort of engagement. Okay, so some additional key takeaways that we want to take here. Since Harris has entered, again, we noted that the Democratic ticket saw a large increase in support from Latina NPP specifically. We also saw a decrease in Latina NPP respondents voting for another candidate, and another decrease from NPP respondents who said that they would not vote. Okay, and then for NPPs and voting in general, we noted that there were more moderate NPPs who were likely to vote for Harris than there were moderate NPPs likely to vote for Trump. About for the 50 to 64-year-old NPP respondents, they also seemed to go towards Harris as opposed to our 18 to 34-year-old NPPs. And then male NPP respondents were significantly more likely than our female respondents to say that they would vote for Trump. Okay, and then lastly, just to summarize, I know we went over a lot, so this is, again, just to maybe clear things up a bit. Some of the top reasonings for supporting their candidate for our respondents included viewing their own candidate as being good for democracy and for selecting the lesser of two evils. Concerns about the other candidate included the other candidate being dangerous to democracy and then not agreeing with the other candidate's platforms. And then one question that we didn't have a chart for, but that we did ask was a follow-up for our NPP voters as to why they wanted to be NPP or did not identify with either party. So the top responses for this included that the parties do not represent their values, and this was especially true for liberal-leaning 18 to 44-year-old and male NPPs. And then for NPPs that said that they want to stay neutral, this was especially true for our moderates, our 45+ age category, and our male NPPs as well. Okay, so now we're going to jump into our California Latina statewide survey results. For this survey, this was conducted at the mid to end July this last year with a survey sample of just over 1,000, and this was only looking at registered Latina voters in the state of California. Okay, so looking at the top issues, affordable housing came out as one of the top issues, and the top reason being that there was a lack of affordable housing and rent prices were too high. So number 2 came out to be jobs in the economy, and then number 3 was healthcare. And then one more question that we asked was about body autonomy and their opinions on what that means. So a majority of respondents believe that the government has no right to interfere with a woman's bodily autonomy, and this was true for about 60% of our respondents. And so what that first question looks like, we asked folks to please rank the topics from a list that we provided on what issue is most important to them, with 1 being the most important. And again, the top 3 issues came out as follows: affordable housing at number 1, jobs in the economy at number 2, and then healthcare access and family planning at number 3. Breaking that down a little bit further, we can see that there's a bit of differences between the regions on how their responses came out to be. So for the Central Valley, we wanted to note that Latinas said jobs in the economy was one of the biggest concerns for them. And then for Southern California, the biggest concern for them was affordable housing. Okay, now looking at the same question but split by party, with a special focus on Democrats and NPP, the biggest concern for Latina Democrats and NPP at the same time were affordable housing, but this was especially the case for our Democrat Latinas. And then same question, but now split by age groups. Affordable housing was the biggest concern for our youngest age cohort at 18 to 34 years old. And then jobs in the economy was a concern for one of our older cohorts from 55 to 64-year-old. Okay. All right, so just to summarize a few things here before we jump into one of our last slides for the survey. is there were a couple questions we didn't show again. Party representation. So 47.7% of our respondents said that the Democratic Party only sometimes gets results for their family. And then when we asked the same question in relation to the Republican Party, 51.8% said that the Republican Party does not get results for their family. When it came to that sort of question breakdown by region, for the Central Valley, about 23% said that the Democrats get results and about 30% say that they don't get results. And then about 11% said that the Republicans get results and almost 55% say that the Republican Party does not get results. For Southern California, the breakdown is as follows. 22% say that the Democrats do get results and 32% say that they don't get results. And then for the Republicans, it looks like 15% said that they do get results and almost 50% say that they do not get results. Lastly, we did have a question on importance of voting in relation to the deciding the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. About 61% of our respondents said that they felt extremely or very important when told that their vote would be influential in deciding this majority. This was especially true for the Central Valley respondents at almost 70% saying that they felt important. And then for SoCal respondents, about 62% said that they feel important. And you'll see that in the next slide, how that breakdown went. So the majority in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate is very slim. Several California House of Representatives could go either way. And the party that wins the majority in the U.S. House could depend on the Latina vote. We asked respondents, how does this make you feel? So this is how that looks. About 61% said extremely or very important, with a high percentage, over a third of our respondents saying it does make them feel extremely important. So you might be asking, well, why is this question something that we want to know? And why did we ask our Latina respondents about their perceptions of vote power? And I'm going to hand it to Pablo to further explain why this is an important question.
So the bottom line here is, again, that there's razor-thin margins of who controls the United States House of Representatives. It is important to demystify and cut through the noise that it is that we're hearing at the national level of all the information that it is that Jesse just shared with you. It is really important to state and re-highlight a couple of those things, right? In order to engage Latino voters, you see that there's nuances at every age level, and we're complex, and we're not, again, a monolithic voting bloc. 60% of all Latinas, right, or Latinos surveyed, stated that bodily autonomy, family planning, or abortion is a primary issue that'll define how it is that they turn out to vote. How you engage the voters, how it is that you listen to voters is significant to make sure that you're actually earning the vote. The no party preference slides that it is that we were presenting show a path towards engaging and having an authentic relationship with voters that is not just mobilizing for the moment, which is mobilizing to get people to vote in the November election, but if you're authentic and working to build these relationships, there's an opportunity for whoever it is that does it successfully, that you'll be organizing to build a movement. Today, again, there are 4 seats that will determine the United States House of Representatives control. There's 4 open seats, and currently there's 211 Democrats and 220 Republicans. Whoever gets the 218 will control the United States House of Representatives. The next slide, please. We as an organization, CNC Action Fund, has created the Lucete Latina campaign that is rooted in all the information that it is that we've been sharing with you today. The audience that we are hoping to be able to reach with this press release or this press event are the general public of Latinos statewide. Again, we will repeat that 1 out of every 6 registered voters in California is a Latina woman, and we've supported the reasons why the Latina women should be a central focus of all elected officials. And Latina women, I hope we will be able to reach out to them through the Lucete Latina program to be able to understand the power that it is that they have and they hold, to be able to decide who it is that represents our families in Sacramento, as well as Washington, D.C. Slide, please. To that end, we're going to wrap up here before we go to Q&A with some do's and don'ts. Based on all the information that it is that you just saw, do's, Do ask questions every time that you feel the need to make a statement. That's to everybody that's running political campaigns. This is not about messaging and message delivery. This is about listening. Do ask what issues are negatively impacting their families and loved ones. Do emphasize the power of 3.2 million Latina women to be the deciding factor in elections. Do emphasize the opportunity that Latina women have to ensure everyone in their household votes. Again, we will highlight that because Latina women are the highest propensity voters in their household, we often are finding that Latina women live in multi-propensity households, right? So whereas before you would ask, can we count on you to help us turn out all your neighbors to vote? The ask has changed and is, can we count on you to make sure that everybody in your household turns out to vote? Do emphasize authenticity, share common values, common experiences, and common aspirations through personal stories in order to build common ground about the importance of the Latina representation in voting. Do highlight public policy plans to address these issues. Again, it is more than messaging. There is a need to demonstrate and show actual public policy plans that will improve the lives of Latino families. And again, it's all highlighted in the information that we shared today. The don'ts, and you see the side eye right there. Do not frame outreach as needing to educate, as Jesse stated earlier. It is really important to listen. And if any campaign or elected official goes into speaking or engaging Latino voters with that mindset, you are creating an environment for you to fail. It's really important for Democrats to understand that they should not make the mistake of thinking that they are the good guys just because they are not the party of Donald Trump. Democrats have work to do. A great many of Latino voters are unconvinced. Again, the increase in no party preference voters overall demonstrates this. Democrats need not to make also the mistake that we are one party voting bloc. We highlighted an array of issues that are not immigration reform, and it would be a mistake for any organization or elected official or campaign to think that they're going to engage Latino voters by just saying, this is my position on immigration reform. While many voters may use that as a litmus test to tell the good guys from the bad guys, we go back to the need for having an actual plan that is authentic, that builds an authentic relationship with voters. Slide. We're going to conclude, and I'll throw it back to Karina in just a moment. CNC has created 2 different projects, one of them in print and one of them in digital video. As I stated at the top of this presentation, CNC will still be engaging through door-to-door canvassing and online phone banking, have live phone calls and live door-to-door contact with voters in Congressional Districts 13, 22, 27, 41. But in addition to that, we've also created these resources that are the Earn the Latina Vote publication, which will be mailed to every Latino household in the San Joaquin Valley and in the Coachella Valley. That publication will be made available to everybody, and it holds as a resource the stories of 12 women that are leading on the issues that were highlighted today. It is intended to be a departing point for any journalist to use as a source in the regions that it is that we've highlighted, and we will be happy to share with you contact information based on those issues for any journalist that needs a source. The Lucete Latina digital video campaign that you can scan the QR code, you see a sample of the videos to the right. Same, it's another group of 15 videos that highlight the array of issues that are being tackled at the forefront by Latina women. And again, another list, another group of sources that we are happy to be able to put journalists in contact with as they're writing the stories and highlighting, again, the Latina women that are at the forefront of addressing the issues that are impacting their families. And to that end, I will throw it back to Karina, and I'll thank everybody for your time.
Thank you, Pablo, for sharing some of that really impressive ground strategy, as well as the digital campaign efforts that are complementary to that. So we've covered a lot of ground today with insights that will have significant implications for the region and potentially nationwide as well. We're now going to enter into the Q&A portion of our event. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions that you may have about the insights shared today, including those on Latino voter preferences, the election strategies, or any other related topics that we discussed here. We'll be taking questions on the Zoom Q&A function, and we're going to address as many as time permits. But I also want to take a moment to introduce one of the other panelists that we have here from Data for Social Good. Jose Luis, if you also want to introduce yourself, just so that our participants know who's available.
Thank you for that. Jose Luis Bedoya, I'm the CEO of Data for Social Good. And we're super happy, super proud to be part of this effort to further the knowledge about the Latino electorate in California and in how Latinas play a central role. So we're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, I'm taking a look at one of the first questions here is, what is the significance of the California vote on the national scale?
I think now let me make sure. I think that's where we finished, right? The Latino voters, there are 4 seats that will decide the control of Congress, right? If you're left to center, the House of Representatives again represents a firewall against if Donald Trump were to be elected and then the Republicans were to take control of the United States Senate. There are 4 seats that make the difference, and we are highlighting 4 of the congressional districts that are in the rural areas of California. So if you're in the Central Valley, the way that it is that I grew up, right now, Central Valley voters have a voice and have the power to decide not only who goes to Washington, D.C., but who actually controls the federal government. Yes, exactly. And that's what the map shows, right? So this map is very significant and will be and could be decided by rural voters in California.
Thank you, Pablo. One of the other questions is related to the narrative and other presentations on the Latino vote. The question is, why are we seeing a gender gap with regards to Latino voter preferences?
So this is something that we have seen not only in California, but nationally, that women tend to be more regular voters, more consistent voters over time. And so we've seen a gap, and in white voters and Black voters, women of those folks. So what we can see is that trend continues with Latinos. I think it has to do with the sense of responsibility or the sense of community that we see in the research, where it's part of your communitarian, outreach, or part of your communitarian responsibilities to actually show up and go out there and vote and be part of and do that communitarian work. If that makes any sense.
Thank you. We also have a question, and I'm going to read this question as it's stated. According to the question, Biden outperformed Trump, but the Republican candidate defeated his Democratic opponent in 2022. This is a Latino majority district. What explains the discrepancy? And does data for Harris support CD22? Data for Harris support in CD22 bode well for the Democratic candidate in November?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Pablo? This might be directed towards you.
What explains the discrepancy that Biden outperformed Trump, but the Republican candidate defeated his Democratic opponent in 2022? Speaking to a Latino majority district, what explains the discrepancy? And does data for Harris support in CD22 bode well for Democratic candidate in November? So this is a prediction.
So I think that the data that it is that we've been showing about no party preference voters, it starts to explain what it is that's happened, right? There are campaigns, in this case, at the congressional level, that engaged voters through party line messaging. And instead of engaging voters, it turned them off, right? So while a Latino voter might vote at the top of the ticket for the Democrat at the local level because they were buying in or tying into the noise, that didn't necessarily land with them. In addition to that, it's really important to be able to understand that issues, and we didn't cover too much of this in relation to water, really have a big determining factor in the South Valley, right? So I think that the Republican Party has done a very good job of vilifying the Democratic Party as creating, as you see down when you drive up the Interstate 5, that there's a man-made dust bowl because the ranchers are not receiving the federal water delivery, right? There's work to be done for those that do not subscribe to that, right? To be able to say that water delivery is one thing, but water delivery to ranches that produces crops and creates jobs is just as important, or I'm sorry, I should say, the clean drinking water that comes out of families' taps in Congressional District 22, where there's over 800,000 people that currently have contaminated water coming out of their water tap, is just as important as delivery to ranches, right? So I think that those are the nuances that district is having. But the bottom line is that there's work that needs to be done to engage voters to be able to understand the needs of those families and then earn their vote that way. The last thing that I'll add to say this is that in 2022, there was over $25 million spent in independent expenditures seeking to mobilize voters in this district. You saw one of the original slides that I started at the very beginning. It did not have the effect that you would expect $25 million to see, right? So I think that TV ads, radio, direct mail is not necessarily the tactics, or are not necessarily the tactics that are actually engaging and mobilizing voters. In regards to Harris, the jury is out. Again, whoever will do the good job about engaging voters will be the ones that actually turn out voters for Kamala Harris as well, right? But that's the reason why it is that we're having the presentation today. The data as it stands, again, the jury is out, and this is essentially an alarm that we're seeking to sound, right? But I'll throw to Jose Luis to add anything that it is that I have missed.
Let me just add that what we have seen in other research is the type of thing that engages low propensity voters or young voters, which the Latino community tends to be, especially in the Central Valley, is direct communication. So what we tend to see is that a lot of incumbents try to do mailers or digital or what have you. But when you have communities that have not been talked to, have not been engaged with, have not been really at the front and center of their original campaign, always as an aside, then it's not a surprise that they're not as engaged. And so one of the things that we'd like about working with an organization like CNC is that they are taking that learnings that we've seen in research, that, you know, going door to door, doing the hard work of engaging with and motivating and moving people. And that's the thing, moving people to, you know, that to actually vote is difficult and it's hard. And so that's why few organizations and few politicians do it. But again, those who engage, those who you bring about that kind of change in people's perception of themselves and the power within the body politic are going to be the ones that do come out and do vote and do win.
And if I might add on to that, I think something interesting that the question that was posed presents is this sort of surprise with, especially concerning these battleground districts in the Central Valley, a surprise that, oh, they voted for the Democratic ticket at the very top level, but then the story was different as you go down ballot. And so something that we want to emphasize is we've mentioned that these are Latino majority districts now. And based on the research that we presented today, party affiliation and party loyalty isn't as strong as you would assume, in that that might be the case for other regions. So seeing that over 40% of our respondents identify as moderate, seeing that there is a growing population of people who don't identify with the Democratic or Republican parties is something that people need to take into consideration, especially when it comes to engaging the Central Valley, especially when it comes into engaging young voters and specifically Latino voters. So just adding on to what Pablo and Jose Luis mentioned, yes, it takes engagement, it takes that face-to-face connection, it takes continuous community connection, right? They want to become familiar with the people that are representing them. And these folks do have stuff to say. It's not that they're disengaged because they don't care, it's they're disengaged because nobody cares about them, or that's what they're perceiving. So that was just my closing statement as well.
Thank you. I'm going to make time for one more question here, and it just relates so well to some of the answers that you guys are giving. The final question here is, are the voters or Latinos that you surveyed influenced more by local or national political leaders and narratives in making their voting decisions?
If I can start by that, I mean, the data shows, right, like, especially when the opening slides, who Latina women will be listening to, and it's local, right? It's really often that what you're hearing at the national level is just noise. People dig in their heels to be able to prove who's right and who's wrong, who the good guy is versus who's the bad guy. But when we engage voters and talk about what it is that's actually impacting their family and their neighborhood and their loved ones, that changes the conversation. So the answer to the question that I would say is, local issues are the ones that really impact and motivate voters more than anything that's happening at the national level. You can still have that conversation, but it's not what you should lead with, right? It's a mistake to lead with, I'm here to educate you about what's happening at the national level. I think that that's a warning to any organizations that are like when you have the Adopt a Sister District that are people are coming from Southern California or the Bay Area or other districts where they believe if I just talk to them and I educate them, they will think like me, without taking into account what Jesse just said, right? They are not disengaged, they are just not convinced. And so I think that those are the important things to talk about. So the local level, what I would encourage for the people to consider is more about what is happening at the family level, right? What is it that's impacting them immediately? And what is the impact to the household and to their family? And that's the pathway forward, right? So I'll end with that, but I'll throw it to Jose Luis or Jesse if they would like to add.
Ladies first. Jesse, you want to add, or you want me to go?
Yeah, I guess just like another comment that I have is this, a lot of this presentation was focused on the power that Latina women specifically hold. And so something as a researcher that we have been hearing a lot about, especially in relation to folks living in the Central Valley, is that they remember. They remember when their local electeds show up to, community events, when they show up to town halls, when they engage with the community. And the reason that I bring Latinas into this is that research has shown that they are the motivating factors for their communities and for their families. So once you are able to engage with them and establish that connection, you're not just getting one voter, you're getting, that Latina and then her family, her friends, anybody that she has a social network with, you're enabling and engaging that network. So I think that's another reason that we're trying to push this sort of emphasis on why it's important to pay attention to Latinos, but especially engaging with Latinas and the issues that are important to them.
And just to round out, the conversation that we keep having is whether national or local. And somebody has said in the past, look, all politics is local, right? Everything is local. One way that I've been trying to explain to people is like national politics. It's like it's a telenovela. It's like nice to see every now and then. You can see people throw popcorn at each other. But what matters to me is, my food prices at the local superstore. What matters to me is my school, my kids getting a good education, my kids doing, my family doing well. And so there's a lot of noise that keeps getting tossed about in terms of, what happens at the national level. But at the end of the day, it's, local electorate talking to people, good old fashioned, talk to people, shake hands, and get to know the community. So that's what the Latino community is looking for. That's what Latinas are looking for. This is what I think the way forward in terms of making some real change in either way. Okay, so by any party, but increasingly we see a movement away from that, and we see movement into the NPP. So it's not that the electorate is wrong, it's perhaps that the product that they're bringing forward is not the right product.
All right, well, Pablo, unless you have one last note to make, I'm gonna give some final words here.
The final thing that I will say is just add on to what Jose Luis was saying, right? So I thank everybody for your time, but I think that the overall theme for today is also, or could also be, demystifying the Latino and Latina electorate, right? What people believe to be the Latino or Latina electorate is likely not what it really is, right? If we continue to dig deeper into all of those numbers, people would need to understand that the majority of the registered voters in these districts are United States born. The majority are bilingual. Nearly half are homeowners, right? So how do you build a campaign to engage those voters? It needs to be very thoughtful. It cannot be a secondary or leftover energy. It needs to be a primary focus, and it needs to be authentic. As Jesse was sharing, if not, we remember right? We remember who didn't come knock on our door. We remember who has not engaged us. And at the end of the day, it goes back to just building those authentic relationships, right? So there's a need to dig into the data to be able to demystify what it is that people believe is happening with the Latino electorate as a state. But as we dig forward, right, when people ask, what is the path forward to be able to engage these voters? We feel very strongly that the path forward is Latina women, 3.2 million, 1 of every 6 registered voters in California, and no party preference voters, as Jessie showed in her presentation, that are skyrocketing through no party preference affiliation, which is a political expression that they don't have a political home within the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So I think that that's what it is that I'll close, and I'll welcome, and I'll look forward to being able to work with everybody that was here and talk to any journalists as we continue forward and help us continue to spread this message. So thank you very much for everybody for attending. I'll throw back to you, Karina.
Thank you, Pablo, and Communities for New California. Thank you also, Data for Social Good, and thank all of you for joining us today for engaging in this important discussion about the power of the Latino voters in California's battleground districts. We hope the insights that we shared today will help illuminate the significant role that Latino voters have, especially the Latina women, and what the impact will be on elections from local to the national level. Following this press conference, we will provide you with all of the relevant materials included today. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss these topics in more detail, including the information on the Lucete Latina campaign or the Earn the Latina Vote publication, we will be providing contact information as well as those materials to you that you can have, that you have had a chance to preview right here. So thank you again for your participation, and this concludes our virtual press conference.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.